Welcome to Hear From Where, a podcast about the journeys that shape us. I'm your host, Chef Andrew Garrett, and each week I'll sit down with incredible individuals who've carved their own paths in health, nutrition, entrepreneurship, sports, and beyond. This is where we dive deep into the stories of determination, resilience, and passion, the moments that brought them here, from where they started. Whether you're looking for inspiration, a spark to start your own journey, or just love hearing amazing stories, then you're in the right place. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's explore what it really takes to follow your dreams. Hello, and welcome to Hear From Now. I am Chef Andrew Garrett, and today I am joined by Heidi Brackebusch. Heidi, hello. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm ready and looking forward to getting into your story and diving into a little bit of what mule packing is, as well as nutrition in the backcountry. So if you could just introduce yourself to the audience and let's go.
Totally, yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. It's great to finally connect with you here, and looking forward to connecting with some of the followers of your podcast. Like you said, my name's Heidi Brackebusch. I work as a mule packer. I never know which to say first, whether I'm more mule packer or more dietitian, but I would say more of my year is consumed by packing right now than it is dietetics work. But there's always, I eat every single day and like to prepare meals with intention every single day. So they overlap for sure. But I have kind of two main job titles. And right now I'm kind of in my slower season, but getting ready to start packing again here in March. So a great time to sit down and chat with you for a while.
Good. And so now where are you guys packing into? So I'm slightly familiar with Idaho's territories, but where are y'all packing at?
So for pleasure, I pack most of central Idaho, I guess. But for work, I predominantly work in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness area, but spend a lot of time personally in the Frank Church and some of the other areas further north, closer to the panhandle of Idaho. So at any given time in my free time, I could be pretty much anywhere from McCall to like Bonners Ferry sort of country. So pretty large spans. But Idaho's really cool. As you know, you've spent some time here, and that there's a ton of different like climates. So throughout the year, you can enjoy going out and recreating in all sorts of different places. There's country with cacti and really more dry and arid, and then you can get really high alpine as it gets warmer and later in the summer, and you can kind of escape the heat. So that's kind of how I recreate and spend my time. But then for work, I pack for the Forest Service on the Moose Creek District. And so that primarily is just transporting goods and heavy materials because a lot of those areas on our district are in wilderness. So no motorized or mechanized or wheeled vehicles. So mules are relied upon. And outside of outfitting, there's not a whole lot of use of pack mules anymore. But my job, luckily, I can say that that's what I do for work.
That's awesome. I mean, it is. It's one of those things and for those who haven't spent time in the Frank Church Wilderness or any of the wilderness in Idaho or anywhere else in the country, like it's intense. It's intense terrain. I mean, I'm 3 years into like really backcountry anything as a profession. And just in the short period that I've been there, it's crazy to see what these animals can do. And the only thing that's really accessible out there, it's like being thrown back in time. Right.
That's for
And
sure.
it's something that's been done for hundreds of years, right? Like, I mean, and so you do this personally as well as a professional. What does mule packing look like professional or personally for you?
So yeah, I do. I grew up central Idaho as well, and my dad, he's kind of one of those guys who's always had horses around. Whether he used them a bunch or not, he's always had them. It's kind of just been his pasture ornaments. But he's spent a lot of years hunting with them as well. So growing up as a kid, we always had horses around, and I was always out there just reinforcing my horse crazy instincts as a young girl. So I've always loved horses and being around them and 4-H and all of the things that little girls want to do with horses. And I guess I've just never really grown out of that, but now I see their utility in getting into some of these more remote places and giving you a few more creature comforts. You know, you can cook a little bit more elaborately, bring your cast iron pan if you want because you have stock. And then in combination with that, it's just a really great opportunity to get to know those animals on a deeper level and kind of create more of a partnership, more of a working relationship, and get to see some really epic places in a much different way. So I kind of recognized that and got into it just pleasure riding mostly, but then really got interested in packing and started reading a ton of books about it during COVID because I was in grad school online and I was going crazy in Zoom classes. And I was thinking, like, how can I escape this place without really getting out of here? So I started reading about packing. And you've seen packing being done. You've probably been involved in it now at this point. You can only read about tying knots for so long before you can't really comprehend anymore. You have to just go do it. So I thought maybe after graduation, I could apply for a job doing it. And luckily, there was an opening. Kind of like we were talking about outside of outfitting, there's not a whole lot of opportunities to pack and be paid to do it. So I was kind of lucky to fall into the position that I'm in now with, you know, some experience, but not a ton. But I've learned a bunch. This will be my third season this year doing it 9 months out of the year. So that's a lot of reps. And that's what I wanted. And that's how I knew I could connect, you know, what I was reading about in these books with actual experience and being able to repeat that. So yeah, then I started doing it for work and graduated with my degree in nutrition and started on the Monday after graduation packing mules. So it was kind of a deviation from what most people would think would be the plan, but I feel pretty confident in my choices so far. It's worked out pretty well.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to rewind a little
Yes.
bit. So you were in school for dietitian to become a dietitian,
Yep.
and then the mule packing was a secondary, kind of side quest, if you will, for you just because you were so bored throughout COVID. So
Yes.
okay, okay, awesome. Because I was thinking to myself, I was like, is there a school for packing? And I mean, I'm sure there's someone out there making money off it somewhere, but I had never seen it. So, and
Yeah, yeah. There's some pretty minimal, like short-term instructions, and if you go to like an outfitter and guide school, there's some packing instruction that goes along with that. But the Forest Service has a few classes, and there's a nonprofit organization that I got involved with throughout COVID, the Backcountry Horsemen of America, and the local chapter where I'm from was a lot like the average age of the chapter is probably 75 or 80, and I can say that with confidence. I mean, like, they're my good friends and a lot of my mentors, but the average age is really old because nobody really wants to get into this anymore. So when I showed up during COVID with a hunger for knowledge and experience, everybody was, you know, very receptive. So they wanted to send me to whatever classes were available. So through the Backcountry Horseman, I was sent to a lot of classes on it, hands-on experience, which helped get the job that I had and really bolstered my skills in it, I guess. But yeah, there's nothing like doing the real thing to just really feel like you're getting to know it.
right, it's definitely one thing that we've struggled with is finding some youth with the outfit that I work for in the Frank Church, and it's very difficult. Like youth is not something that exists, and it is kind of run by these folks that have been doing it for years and years and years. What was the experience like for you being kind of the kid in that group? I mean, I'm a part of the VFW here in Oregon, and it's a similar experience where like I go to the VFW hall and I'm the youngest guy by 30, 40 years. But it's this really exciting thing where it's like I've got a bunch of uncles and grandpas, hanging around. Was that kind of a similar experience for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I do feel like I have a bunch of bonus, I guess, grandparents, and with that, like they have so many years of knowledge and they've seen so many things. And I've always been drawn to an older population, anyways. Like I thought outside of tactical and kind of wilderness athletes, that the geriatric population was probably like they were my people. So I think maybe I'm just an old soul. I don't really know, but a lot of those folks that I met through Backcountry Horsemen, they were at our wedding and yeah, I gained a bunch of friends. And with that, I mean, just the knowledge that's been passed down to them and some really great equipment that they were just like, they figured they were getting out of packing. So they were like, here, you know, take this. I'm not going to use it. So there's like some antique and like collector's item sort of tack that they've just given me. So it's been just like a ton of benefit. And I just show up and I try to have enthusiasm, but I don't really know how to return the favor other than just passing on the tradition that they care about so much and helping keep trails open and keep up on maintenance and just keep stock use in the backcountry fluent, I guess, and advocate for it, just because there's plenty of people that use trails that don't like to see, horse shit on the trail, and they want horses to not be a part of this system. But they don't realize that, packers and stock use and having the outfitters out there is why the trails are open. So yeah, just being an advocate is, I think, all I can really do to repay all of the mentorship that I've received.
That's awesome. Okay, let's go back to school. Let's go back to dietitian work. So
Oh yeah.
now
Yes.
I'm really curious because like we talked about before we started recording, is like not life is not linear, right? So there's all these different directions that we can head. And so you went from 4-H, growing up with your father who had pasture ornaments, your words, not mine, and you then decided that becoming a dietitian was the direction you wanted to go. What was it that sparked that thought and that passion, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so this is kind of where the story of the South Fork of the Salmon comes into play. So my dad, although he had pasture ornaments and at one time used stock pretty readily, is kind of in his golden years at this point, which is part of why they're pasture ornaments. But in his younger years, he spent, his entire career in the state of Idaho. He was a fisheries biologist, so a lot of his work was in the Idaho backcountry, and he had his pilot's license. He had stock, so he was eager and willing to go into these remote places and look at, the stocking potential of all these backcountry lakes and stuff. So he's incredibly familiar with the state of Idaho and he's kind of like me and you, and likes to make connections with all these places. And so he made a bunch of connections with all of these backcountry ranches. And the one ranch manager at the time who probably stuck out to him the most was the ranch manager of the Hettinger Ranch, pretty close to Warren, where you've spent some time.
I know the Hettinger very well.
Yes. So as a young kid, my dad would go back there and work on the hydroelectric plant. And I would go just tag along with him because he was pretty much retired at that point. So I would spend a lot of time with my dad. And the ranch manager there recruited me to start coming back there. I think I was 10 the first summer that I spent any significant amount of time to help, with whatever needed to be done. They were always moving irrigation line and all of this kind of random stuff. And Tim's wife, Judy, had a huge garden. And so there was always jobs for kids, and their daughters had grown up and left the house. So they were kind of empty nesters. So I started going back there at the age of 10, and I would spend anywhere from 3 weeks to, a month or two back there from 10 until 17. So putting up hay. And part of that was they had a lot of outfitter stock there at the time. And Tim would raise young horses too, to kind of buy and sell to other outfitters. So there were always young horses around. And Judy would be working in the garden, and I got to know Judy really well and spend a ton of time in the kitchen there at the Hettinger Ranch. So you've probably walked through that kitchen. That's probably like where my interest in food and nutrition was kind of born, just because I realized the connection between, sharing meals in places like that are so special, and growing the food there. You can't just go down to the grocery store and pick up whatever ingredient you think of. So Judy was incredibly, and is still incredibly, skilled at making gourmet meals out of like the most basic pantry you can imagine. So she was a huge influence on my interest in food and nutrition. And I've always had a love for eating, but I mean, arguably I was probably a little bit heavy when I started going back there just because I loved food. But I recognized, like, yeah, you can bake cookies and eat treats and you're going to work your butt off on the ranch. But, at the end of the day, you can come in and enjoy these meals because they just taste better back here and you've earned them. So that's kind of where my start in food and nutrition occurred. And that's why I have such a really close relationship with, Central Idaho, that part of the Frank Church and all that. It just feels like home and kind of where I got my start on a lot of these things.
That's awesome. I love that you're connected to the Hettinger, and for me personally, because I can actually envision that because I've been there. And for our listeners that don't really know what we're talking about and the importance of the Hettinger Ranch, would you be able to kind of break down what it is that's special about that place, not only to you, but to, some random chef that has been introduced to it over the last 3 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess just in general, a lot of central Idaho is dedicated to wilderness areas, which is incredible. I mean, it takes forever to get from the top of Idaho to the bottom because there's so many areas that are preserved, which is part of what makes Idaho so unique and special. But with that, there's a lot of areas that are roadless, and this is bordered up right against the Frank Church Wilderness, and kind of sandwiched between some other national forest ground. What's rare about this place and some of the other backcountry ranches is they're kind of some of the last private inholdings, and some are even more, isolated within the wilderness than this. This just kind of butts up against it, but it's really unique in that there's no development that's going to occur, nearby. So this place, being homesteaded, I don't remember the year. I probably should brush up on some of my Hettinger history, but it's something like 200 acres. I should know this, but a pretty large piece of private land, and it was at one time, fully operating ranch that supported local outfitters. Now it's owned by a family, and they're hoping to keep it in the family, which is special, and keep it the way it is. There's some easements on it that will, kind of maintain its charm and the way that it is now. But it's, a fully working ranch, and the managers intend to manage for preserving that feel too. And it's powered by hydroelectric power, so it's, off the grid, pretty self-sufficient. It's probably 2.5 hours from town. I mean, depends on how you drive, I guess, but there can be a lot of traffic on that road. It's quite a ways from town. The characters that spend their time back there, I mean, they all know each other, so it's got this kind of cool community feel. And it's the only place at the end of that road, so it really is kind of feels like you're out there in the wilderness. So, what's your experience, or how else would you describe it?
So, my experience with the Hettinger is both from driving in from McCall and driving on the backcountry roads in Caleb's giant rigs and getting down there, loading up the entire flatbed with hay for our stock in camp, and then driving it back over. This year, I had a new experience of the Hettinger Ranch, and that was because we got pushed off the mountain due to wildfire at Big Creek. So that wildfire at Big Creek was like right in the middle of, I think it was our third week of hunters at the top, and we had to get off the mountain. Forest Service said, "Hey, you guys gotta skedaddle." So we had to call in a helicopter and get our clients off the mountain with elk, with deer. And then we had to pack up camp and go off the backside of Mosquito down the Portney trail. And you know what that trail looks like.
Yep.
And, to touch base on what you said earlier, is the South Fork, the Salmon River Canyon is the second deepest canyon in North America. So we're going from 8,700 feet back down to about 1,300 feet at the Hettinger. And I tell you what, by the time we hit mile 13, and my ass was sore, my hamstrings were cramping because I don't ride horses throughout the year. I ride horses for 6 weeks at a time, once a year, and walking down that trail along the slate and the narrowness, and just looking over and having absolute cliff, and then getting to a bridge that is a wooden support bridge with what are the suspension, a wooden suspension bridge across the river. And it was at that point I thought to myself, this is where Henry is going to buck me off. I'm going to land in the river, break my back, and never see the other side of the land again. Luckily, all of our stock kick butt, cruise across the bridge, no problem. And then I realized that the Hettinger was the next stop, and we were so close. And you get to that 2.5, 3 mile mark, and you're just like, waiting and waiting and waiting. You don't realize that there's more shale along the trail. There's more shale that just cliffs down to the river, and you're on the back of this horse that you're putting your life, right? I'm trusting my life with this animal who I have a relationship 6 weeks a year with, and my guts are going, my hamstrings are cramping, my calves are cramping, my shoulders are cramping. I'm getting whacked in the face by those super thorny dry tree brushes. I've got scratches across my face. I'm wearing a pack on my back because we had to get out of there quick, and we have all of our other stuff packed on the pack animals. And all I can think to myself is the Hettinger's right around the corner, the Hettinger's right around the corner. And the most beautiful thing in the world to me right now is what riding along that trail, and you're in this really narrow river canyon, and you're just kind of cruising along, and there's elevation gains all to your right, and there's elevation loss all to your left. You could hear the river flowing, you can see all these beautiful trees and all the forestry up to your right, but you can't see around the next bend, you can't see around the next bend. And then all of a sudden you come through one more bend, it flattens out, there's always mule deer or sitting in this little meadow, and then you look kind of ahead and you can see green pasture, and you see that green pasture, and it's like this just warming, exciting feeling where, oh my God, we're home, we
We
made it.
made it. Yeah.
And that's where you get that, like, oh, that big sigh of relief. The cramps kind of go away, you forget that your ass hurts, you forget that you've got blood coming off your face. I had fallen down earlier and my finger was sliced open. I sliced the tip of my pinky off, and so like I'm bleeding, I've got just imagine the most miserable chef ever riding a horse that he's not comfortable with along that trail, just to get to see those pastures. And the pastures are wonderful, and they flow all the way down to the edge. You can look over into the river, and you get there, and it's like taking a step back in time. It's like you've arrived. And I love the old Wild West stories of like guys like Jim Bridger. Like, I love reading about that because that experience had to be something else. They had nothing that we have today, and they did it. And here I am complaining that I have, a nice pack, and I have great stock, and it's only been 14 miles. Like, it's not that bad, like, really. But you walk into that, and it's like taking a step back in time, and there's a lot of the old equipment there that they still use, and the folks that are there are warm and welcoming, and it's just nice to see that big smile on someone else's face when you arrive. And yeah, the Hettinger Ranch is a very special place, and I have just admiration for folks that have really experienced as much as you have, which I didn't realize you had spent so much time there and you're so connected to it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it is cool. And the management now, I always bother them because I'm always like, I want to come back, like, and they're very kind to me because they know I have a long history there. But yeah, I always feel like I don't want to ever be a nuisance. And when I show up, I always show up ready to work or be helpful or contribute because yeah, they don't have time to just sit and visit with everybody. So you got to be at least halfway useful when you show up. So I try to go back once in a while, every couple years, and help with haying or something, just because it is a place that feels unchanged, even if he's always making upgrades there and making things nicer. But when you go back, you're right, it's just like you've taken a step back in time, and it's cool because it feels kind of like what you think maybe the Idaho backcountry was a long time ago, and in some certain areas still is. But like you said, the trip that you had, that's no easy commute for sure. But you think about some of the guys who used to make their living back there, and were like part of the gold rush days and supporting the early growing produce for the people of Warren and packing that to and from. I mean, I read a lot about some of the old homesteads on Big Creek, and they would just ride from Big Creek to Warren just like for a grocery trip, and it was really casual, and it's just crazy to me because that's such a long trip and so difficult. So yeah, there's some really cool history and some really hard characters back there. They really are some gritty people that still live back there and have throughout history too. So yeah, it's a good place to go test yourself for sure. It sounds like you've gotten a good taste for that.
Oh yeah, no, Caleb's pushed me. I like to think he treats me like one of the mules. He loves me and wants to see how hard and how far I can go. So
That guy's a hard
uh,
charger. So yeah, you have to.
he is. I absolutely love working with him. It's been probably the highlight of my culinary career so far. And
Yeah.
speaking towards culinary, because I'm going to get sidetracked because I love mules. I have fallen in love with these animals and the characters that they are. Like each animal has a completely different temperament. They have different behaviors, and you start to see just these these really fun characters that exist in my work life up there. But I'm gonna step away from the mules. Let's get back to dietitian. Let's get back to nutrition.
Yes. That
You hit a
sounds
good
good.
point. Is there something very rewarding about feeling like you've earned those cookies, like you've earned those brownies, like you've earned that dinner, right? How do you translate that feeling into your day to day when you're not, quote unquote, earning it, right? Like, how do you create nutritionally dense foods in your day to day life? Like, what's your game plan?
Well, I guess people ask me that quite a bit, and oftentimes I get asked, like, like what foods are off limits to you, or what do you not eat certain times of the year? And there's really nothing that I don't think can fit within a healthy diet and a healthy approach to eating year round. But really, it's a lot of people say this, especially lately, it feels like, but the dose makes the poison. And, if you can't control the amount, then some of those foods maybe should be things that you should abstain from. But if you can enjoy things in moderation, then the cookies, the treats, whatever, it can be enjoyed. Part of what's great about difficult backcountry excursions and feeling like you've earned it is that those foods are more so necessary for optimal performance, and they can be viewed as fuel and also like just super enjoyable and delicious when you're out there. But they're necessary to complete whatever effort you're putting out there. So yeah, I would say that my philosophy, I guess, is I enjoy all foods and I love cooking and experiencing food. But I definitely practice a lot more moderation during this time of year, and I try to stay physically fit throughout the year. But yeah, there's nothing I don't enjoy year round, I don't think.
Fair. I like that approach. I try to live in that myself. I grew up on a small farm. And so we grew up with growing our own vegetables, raising hogs and steer, and hunting out of the backyard. Like I didn't eat fast food until I was in my teens and moved to town, and it became a reward. And I didn't realize at the time, because I mean you're a teenager, you're a kid, you don't realize that your mind is associating this treat with a reward. So I've struggled for a long time with, oh, this is a treat. I'm gonna have a treat. I'm gonna have a treat, and it became a real problem for me. And I've struggled with my weight for a long time. But getting into that place of like moderation has been a really, just being cognizant of what I'm eating and why I'm eating it has been a huge one for me. Backcountry nutrition. I think that the growth of social media and some of the big Instagram hunters and mountain men has really kind of exploded everyday people into, oh, I'm going to be a backcountry hunter now. And they go out there, and I feel like they're really ill prepared, because I think that, from my own experience and being, I'll call myself it, I'll say I'm a flatland hunter, right? Like the Oregon Coast Range is not that tough, but you get into these wilderness places where you're gaining 3,000, 4,000 feet of elevation over a matter of miles. You've got to be fueled to really be successful up there. And
Mhm.
so what does that look like? I mean, what does that look like to you? And do you think that there is a great model for it, or is it just kind of figuring out what the person is and what their likes are?
There's a little bit of both, which is, I mean, anything relevant to nutrition, and you've experienced this, I'm sure. It's really hard to give like blanket recommendations. And I talk to a lot of groups, and especially like tactical athletes, wildland firefighters, especially get asked to do a bunch of group presentations, and they always want like recommendations. What are the guidelines? And it is really individualized. And you know this from experience, but even just your history with food and, your preferences, I guess, if you will. All of these things play into how you should create kind of a fueling plan. But I guess overarching, I'll kind of speak to um, just physical work in the backcountry is incredibly calorically demanding. And I feel like the biggest thing that I see is just inadequate calorie consumption. And we can get into more of, where are those calories coming from. But in general, I feel like people are inadequately fueling. They're not bringing enough fuel. They're not bringing enough carbohydrates to recover the muscle and be able to get back out there, the next day. And I feel like one of the biggest problems is folks can propel themselves to their base camp, but they're not being proactive in their fueling the previous day in order to feel the energy to go out the next day and hunt hard, because they've gotten to where they're going and they've just burned everything and haven't thought about recovery, and then they're unable to perform day after day after day. And with that, I feel like a lot of, like you're saying, backcountry hunting has become more and more popular, and a lot of folks want to do it and they see it as a great physical challenge. But I feel like in general, most of the folks speaking on these big platforms with a lot of followers are not always getting appropriate information out there. A lot of folks are in the off season or when they're at home eating like really fat centric foods and low carbohydrates because they're worried about eating for aesthetic more than performance. So then you try to apply that to the backcountry setting and you just can't, straight up cannot fuel the muscle in the same ways with, fat centric, protein centric meals as you can with predominantly carbohydrate, with some of those other things included because they're important as well. But the way that eat for aesthetic is not an appropriate way to eat for endurance and difficult terrain and load carriage in the backcountry on a hunt for 10 days. So that I don't feel like is being communicated on these really big platforms. So I hope that culture kind of shifts. For a long time, carbohydrates have been the bad guy, and there's room for every macronutrient, but I just feel like protein gets the most attention, and yes, it's very important. We know that for sure. But carbohydrates, when it comes to optimal performance in the backcountry, I think are the most overlooked.
I absolutely 100% agree. And I am like, I love to hear people talk about this and talk specifically to that because, like you said, most of these folks that are on these big platforms that are out there, they're working for aesthetics in the off season, and that's what the general population is seeing. And the videos and the experiences are of the hunt; they aren't of what people are eating or how they're eating or how they're fueling. Um, so what does the right calorie balance look like? Like where are those calories coming from in your opinion? Is it carbs, fats, proteins? How do you balance that out while you're burning, what 35, 45, 6,500 calories a day, like if not more? I mean, those wildland firefighters and tactical athletes, like those guys have to be burning 7, 8,000 calories a day. Is that crazy? Am I crazy?
No, you're pretty close. I mean, that's a little bit high from what they've seen in some tracer data that they've done, actually, because we all know that these watches aren't 100% accurate. A lot of folks reference them, which is good to track changes, I guess, but they're not super accurate. But in some of the data that they've actually done on field studies with caloric expenditure, they found upwards of like 6,300 was the upper end. And those are some of those larger individuals like Sawyer type folks who are moving rounds and like very active all day, but they have a huge caloric expenditure. And in the context of wildland firefighting, it's really hard to keep up with that demand. And a lot of folks throughout the season, they lose pounds, sure, and a lot of people see that as like, oh, I've lost weight, fire season was good to me. But a lot of people are losing muscle mass and they're not keeping up. And with that, I guess talking about hunting too, the hunt that you've been waiting all year for and happen to draw that you're super excited for, that is not the time to want to try to drop 10 pounds. That should be up in the preparation. If you're interested in losing a few pounds off of, your chassis, that's great. But yeah, I would say that if you are shooting for a calorie deficit when you're on your hunt, your performance is going to tank. So same thing with wildland firefighting. I think one of the biggest educational components, like we talked about earlier, is just adequate calories, carbohydrates, I would say being the largest percentage of that macronutrient breakdown. just performance based. And this can change throughout the year. I mean, the way that you eat, obviously, on a hunt is not the way that you should eat throughout the whole season. I mean, I eat more Pop-Tarts during hunting season than probably the whole rest of the year. But I know that, that fuel is necessary, and it's something that's going to taste good, on those instances where I'm, hot and tired and I don't have a huge appetite, but I know I need to fuel. I would say with that too, that just frequency of eating is huge when it comes to keeping your energy levels up. And that's another educational point that I don't think is getting across as much, is that, around every 90 minutes, you should definitely be consuming something, predominantly carbohydrate. And then, at the end of the day, really focusing on a good recovery focused meal, a pretty decent amount of protein, something that you can take the time to digest, because throughout the day, maybe you weren't willing to sit down and have a larger meal because it might slow you down. So focusing on recovery at the end of the day, that, and then also hydration, emphasizing hydration. And everybody wants to know, well, how much exactly should I drink? You're going to kind of know, drink, be proactive with that too. Drink pretty aggressively if you have the water source, and also try to replenish some of those electrolytes. There's some great beverage options out there that have carbohydrates and electrolytes that, they're not just for folks doing ultra marathons. The kind of demands that are placed on a backcountry hunter are similar, if not more difficult than that of, an endurance athlete. It's not a sanctioned event. There's no aid stations, but you should still be looking at yourself as an athlete, and investing in the nutritional component as well as the training, just like athletes do.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think that, hitting on the idea of, a lot of people are like, oh, I'm going to lose 10 pounds when I do this hunt, that's just it's such a terrible mindset, but it's kind of what's been created in the new Insta hunter world, right? Like, it's, oh, you know what, I can lift weights and, I'll do some walks, but you don't really understand how much you're really going to burn because you aren't actually there, and there's nothing that's going to prepare you for what's on the ground there versus where you're standing now. And I mean, that's something that we learned in the Army. Like, I was a tanker in the Army, so I really didn't walk very many places, but we were constantly like over prepared. What does proactive eating look like to you? Because I think that that's something that we hear a lot of. And if you could break that down into like the simplest terms that I could actually understand, like, what is proactive eating and like proactively being on top of hydration? Because I think that that
Mm-hmm.
kind of gets washed over a lot with most folks.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, when it comes to, I guess I'll speak to the hydration component first. So, our mechanism for thirst is definitely behind our hydration status. So, if you are feeling that sensation of thirst, you're already likely behind, if you will, or less than adequately hydrated. So, if you rely just on thirst and you wait for that, you're kind of behind the power curve. So, thinking about that proactively, it's just like, having some mechanism. Maybe it's you rely on a camelback because it's convenient, or you think about every so often you need to sit down and take 10 and have a bite and some fluids. Being proactive is just not waiting for your body's signaling necessarily to hydrate. So, same thing goes with fueling too. You shouldn't wait until your stomach is rumbling and, oh, I had breakfast at 7 a.m. this morning at camp. I'm not going to eat until noon when I sit down to glass. Like, no, you should strive to eat around every 90 minutes, because this is not like listening to your hunger cues at home when you're working your desk job. This is like you are trying to feed the muscle and have a constant trickle of an energy source, because that leads to performance outcomes and less glycogen depletion, and you're going to be able to perform the next day. So I would say being proactive is trying to stay ahead of those cues that your body will give you when you're already kind of behind in a way. And this performance fueling and fueling during the event is, like I said, different than just everyday nutrition. Like, being hungry is okay when you're working, at a sedentary job, but when you're out there trying to get the most out of your body and performance, you don't want to wait till you're hungry, because your muscle is going to be underfueled if you do that.
That's awesome. Thank you. So I played rugby at some relatively high levels, and I grew up in an era that was, you go to pasta night at Joey's house and everybody eats a whole bunch of spaghetti pasta, and that's going to be your fuel for the big game tomorrow. And I think that research has shown us over the last 15 years that that was like really crazy. So I think that breaking that habit for people my age of 40 plus that are really trying to, push themselves in the woods has changed. What would preemptively, like, what does, preparation look like as far as like eating the day before and like fueling the tank, if you will, leading into this giant expenditure? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, that's a great question because, like you're saying, the typical thoughts around carbohydrate loading, which is what I'll speak to first, I guess, are that it's like a spaghetti dinner the night before your track event or your race or whatever. But you're likely behind once again if you're doing it just the night before. The night before, too, you don't want to eat anything too crazy or exotic or huge or fatty, just to shock the system. So you want to try to keep things close to your event as predictable and normal and routine as you can. So if you know you're gonna fly into a backcountry place or hike in and start your hunt on this day, and you've spent a lot of the rest of the year preparing, physically you've done the work, you've put in the work, you've been recovering and fueling throughout that time. As you get closer to the hunt, I mean, it's similar to other endurance events. You don't want to be, physically training really hard, right up to that moment. You want to be kind of tapering off of exercise, starting about the week before, 5 days before. And with that, you want to be dialing up that carbohydrate consumption just so you can really top off those levels of glycogen, which for those of your listeners who don't really know, about kind of the physiology of the muscle. The glycogen is the storage form of carbohydrate in the muscle, and it's a fairly short term source of energy, really. I mean, we have bottomless sinks, if you will, for fat storage in the body. Obviously, we can keep adding to that adipose tissue, but glycogen and carbohydrate in the muscle is fairly limited. So we want that to be as topped off as possible because it has direct relation to our performance outcomes. So we want to optimize glycogen storage. And that starts, yeah, like I was saying, with your tapering and exercise 5 days to a week ahead of your event. And I've seen this play out directly in like smoke jumper rookie training, for example, which is very physically demanding. And it's, something that folks prepare for well in advance. Usually they want to train like right up very close to the actual start of rookie training. But what I've helped folks with and learned that works well is having a taper a lot like you would for other endurance events and giving yourself some time to rest and recoup because you're going to put in the work when you're out there on that hunt or doing that rookie training. The months leading up to this time are when you had to, exercise really hard and maybe you were working on dropping weight. That's the time when the calorie deficit is important. The week before the event is not the time to, really hit it hard and, deplete yourself of energy. That's the time to be topping off those tanks and resting because what's ahead is going to be, physically demanding enough.
Yeah, I think that people really underestimate the power of our glycogen stores and how dangerous it really is to go into like real exertion and not be concerned about how much protein you're consuming because you're like, yeah, sure, like you said earlier, is like, oh, I came out of here 10 pounds lighter, but how much of that is lean muscle mass, and it's
Mhm.
not necessarily going to be like these fat stores that we've been building up the entire off season and go out there and burn. So, you know, having that kind of mentality of, what, I need to fuel this system, otherwise I'm going to start breaking down. Because I mean, the danger of being in the backcountry and having severe dehydration uh, is a real thing, or like your body just deciding that it's going to start falling apart is like we are the human body is an amazing vehicle, but it's not this unlimited just go and go and go. And yeah, sure, like your brain could get you through a lot of things. Like your mentality can help you push that your body to the next level. But when you start getting short on sugar and your brain doesn't start functioning the way that it's supposed to, and you start having those really wild thoughts, like it's not, you've already missed the mark, right? Like you haven't fueled leading into it. Um, what are some ways for folks to kind of prepare themselves eating wise leading into the season, right? So, we kind of touched on, you know, preemptively being aware like 5 days out. What are some foods that people should really be focusing on in those 5 days? What are the best kinds of proteins or carbohydrates that someone can start fueling their body with?
I would say this is where like a lot of folks want meal plans and specifics, but this is where, if it's something within your normal dietary patterns that you consume, or culturally that's a staple food for you, that's something that I would just take and start to dial that up as things get closer. Either dial up the amount or the frequency of consumption of some of those foods that you're used to and that you like. And same with fueling on the hunt. I could give you a list of foods that I like. Everybody should like Pop-Tarts, so Pop-Tarts are for sure one of them. Please sponsor me, Pop-Tarts. But uh, other foods that you're used to, and also practice how you play. Don't throw something in there that you see some influencer says is the best thing from whatever backcountry supplement company is out there, and try it on the hunt as the first time you've ever tried that out on your body. I mean, use that as a time to feel like you've rehearsed for that moment, and your fueling plan and your demands. And there's, I guess a side note, we can talk about this more, but my good friend in Boise, his name's Kyle Camp. He has a really cool backcountry nutrition focused dietetics practice, and I've been working with Kyle and kind of under his wing, which has been awesome. But he has tools specific to this. He has a backcountry nutrition planner where you can get on there and you can type in things that you normally consume, or you can get inspiration as well from that guide, and it helps formulate like a grocery shopping list, so you can take that on the way to your hunt and know exactly what you need to purchase. So some really handy tools that he's come up with. I would say definitely go check that out on his website, and I can share more of that at the end too, how to connect with him or I, because there's some great resources made out there. You don't have to guess really, and there's science behind some of what's calculated in those guides, and it's tried and true stuff too. I mean, Kyle is a backcountry hunter, and he's tested this for years and years now. So there's a lot of ways that you can optimize, but don't shock the system with a bunch of brand new techniques right on the days leading up to your trip or the days of your trip.
I love that. It's such the fad world that we live in, where everybody wants to try something. Oh, I'm going to change everything right now, and that's not going to be sustainable. And I loved hearing you say that, because you put it in really, really good context. Speaking of fads, what's your opinion on the fad diet world? And whether it's the keto, the paleo, the carnivore, the Whole30, what's your take?
This is good. This is good to bring up. Well, I would just say with any of these recommendations, these fad diets that seem to be kind of a flash in the pan, just wait, because the opposite of that diet will probably be next year's popularized diet. I would say that any diet that eliminates any macronutrient or entire food group altogether is not super sustainable, unless you have an allergy or an intolerance. Then that could be appropriate for you. But any diet that says something is completely off limits, I would say is probably not the most sustainable course of action. Now, there could be certain times of the year where maybe you do dial down the carbohydrates in your diet because of certain goals that you have, or what sort of training you're doing. Some other examples out there, but I would say, yeah, the fad diet world and diet culture is a really interesting space. I feel like a lot of my nutrition Q&As are just spent debunking a lot of these fads. So I would say just a general healthful diet, approaching things in moderation. Things that we know are that, lean proteins are good for you. We need, a pretty significant amount of protein to retain muscle mass, especially if you're training. The micronutrients available in fresh fruits and vegetables and whole grains are super beneficial. These are things that we know. Would I focus solely on the protein from lean meats and only eat those and eliminate fiber? No. But there are a lot of folks that insist that that is the key to health. So I would just say moderation is huge. Now, not to oversimplify it though, nailing these things can be really difficult. And because food is delicious and we have mechanisms within our body that cue us to want more or saltier or sweeter or, all of these things, it is more difficult than just saying eat in moderation, you'll be fine, but that's where having guidance from somebody, accountability from, even if it's just a fitness coach or another friend, somebody that you train with, can be huge, because you can kind of bounce ideas off each other and have some of that accountability, maybe inspiration for meal prep and all these things. So it is not to oversimplify it, because it's very complicated to really nail it, I guess, but it's not as complicated as I feel like pop culture has made it seem.
No, I couldn't agree more. I've been in the personal chef space for about 6 years now, and clients always ask me, because of my background with athletics and being in the outdoors, like they ask me a lot of questions, and they're always trying the new thing. And what do you think of this? What do you think of that? It's like, well, I mean, is it going to be sustainable for you? And I think that's the biggest question. Like, folks really need to answer for themselves: is this something that I can sustain for a long period of time, or is this just something I'm going to do and until I don't feel good anymore? I myself don't like to give advice or make suggestions based on anything that I haven't done. And
Mm-hmm.
so pretty much over the last 6 years, every time someone's asked me, what's your opinion on this? I'm like, well, I guess we're going to find out. And,
Yep.
I've gone through the elimination diets. I've gone through the paleo diet. I've been a vegetarian. I've been a vegan. I've done the carnivore diet. I've done the animal-based diet. Like, I've done all these things that I wanted to understand what it did to my body. Uh, and it's wild how messed up it is. And I think that getting back to the eat what's comfortable or culturally is your food that you've been eating for all this time, is like figure out how to dial those things in moving into your big exertions. I think that that's just like such a gem to pull out of this conversation, is like, don't try to change everything. Do what your body's already used to, because I don't think people realize how accustomed our bodies become to the nutrients that we're giving it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That, and I mean, we think about food too as nutrients, but you and I, as people who love to cook and gather and prepare meals and feed people, you have to also look at food as a way to come together and celebrate and relate, and all of these things that food is. It's more than just macronutrients. So to put yourself in a position where you can't have birthday cake because of some crazy strict diet that you're on. Now, if you want to cut back on calories and you want to abstain from birthday cake, that's fine. But if you feel like it's keeping you from participating in all of these, joyous celebrations or holidays or whatever, then I would encourage you to try to find a happy medium there, because yeah, food is more than just macros, and it's fun to nerd out on that sort of stuff, but it is also, you have to remember that food brings us together, and it is a really cool tool in other ways too.
I couldn't agree more. And you hit on my mantra around food. And I would love if you would expand on what food is to you beyond nutrients and fuel. What is food to you?
Whoa, I feel like we could just talk for hours. I don't even know. I would say most of it is gathering. And if anybody listens to this mulemanship podcast I was on yesterday, I kind of had a similar answer, but because it is kind of my mantra, it makes sense that I would have a similar answer. But I was talking yesterday about how, it's really easy to walk around with judgmental thoughts about other people. And I do it all the time. I'm guilty of it. I find myself, making assumptions in the airport about people I don't even know, or being judgmental when I'm just sitting there taking it in. But I was thinking about, I told kind of a story yesterday, and I won't tell it today, but about how coming together over food or a shared cup of coffee, or whatever it may be, is just such a great way to break down all of those barriers. And it's pretty hard to have an enemy after you've shared a meal with somebody, if that makes sense. It's really a powerful tool, for community, and it can be a huge act of kindness, sharing a meal or bringing a meal to somebody in need. So I think food is really healing in that way, and it helps us kind of relate in the world more and just find common ground with people, because yeah, it's really hard after you've shared a meal to not find something in common with everybody.
That's gorgeous. It's absolutely perfect. I love that response, and I couldn't agree more. Where can people connect with you and find information about possibly working with you? You mentioned Kyle in the Backcountry Dietetics and Nutrition Planner. Where can we find information that is going to help get your voice connected with other people who are seeking to learn more and get deeper involved?
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess with this, I'm super grateful for social media because it allows me to connect with, people like you, Andrew, and others who are in similar areas with similar beliefs and passions. So I have social media as much as I kind of hate it sometimes. I also love it. But I have an Instagram. You can find me at the Decker Dietitian. So Decker, spelled kind of like it sounds, but that is, the type of pack saddle that we use and the style of packing that's done in Central Idaho and Montana. And there's a lot of history there. But my page, the Decker Dietitian, has mule content. I feel like I love to share stuff about, the pack strings. It's pretty hard not to be enamored with a pack string. I don't know what it is about it, but like you've said, it's just kind of a step back in time. So a lot of pack string and mule oriented content. You can see a lot of my personal animals on there. I do some training, so kind of following along with the training that I'm doing and new cute baby animals that I find myself buying all the time. And then also just some nutrition advice and some practical tips for just navigating this, ever confusing space. And then with that, just, ways to connect with other people and where those two aspects of my page kind of combine. So if you're interested in nutrition or mules or both, I can be found at the Decker Dietitian. And I work under another dietitian doing, one-on-one consulting and helping with education. There's a lot of free content as well on this page. It's Valley to Peak Nutrition, and you can find that at v2pnutrition.com, and that's the number 2, or on Instagram at v2p nutrition. And Kyle puts out a ton of stuff. In addition to that backcountry planner, he has a ton of other free content, newsletters, all sorts of stuff. And he also has a lot of really cool stuff that he puts out on his page, as well as a podcast. So he would be a great guest for you to have if you are looking for more in the future, because he has a really cool philosophy on nutrition as well, and is a great just mentor for me and friend. So yeah, the Decker Dietitian and Valley to Peak Nutrition, if you're interested in learning more or just getting some free content out there.
Yeah, I will say that your page is one of my favorite pages to follow because it is such a great mix of animals, nutrition, wilderness, and it if for anything else, it's great entertainment.
Yes.
Heidi, thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me today. I'm going to put all the places we can find you in the show notes so that it's easy for folks to just kind of click and they don't have to write anything down. But I truly this is an awesome conversation. It's really getting into the source, and it's nice to finally face to face meet someone that has had the experiences that you have. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, Andrew, it's been a pleasure. And for any of your followers, if you just want to reach out or connect or have any questions, send them my way. I love to connect with people, so I appreciate it a bunch.
Good. I hope they bombard you.
Yes.
Right on. Thank you so much. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.